Hello and welcome back to our Motivation, Emotion, Stress, and Health unit. Today we are diving into the emotion side of this unit, taking a look at the emotion theories. There are different theories that help us to understand why we feel the emotions that we do, how we feel them physiologically in our body, and how they show up on our face through our facial expressions. So let's go ahead and take a look. Today we're going to take a look at the different theories of emotion on how emotions work. Does our heart pound because we're afraid? Or are we afraid because our heart is pounding? There are different theories of emotion that explain why we experience these physiological changes in our body based on the emotions that we're feeling in different perspectives. The first one is the James-Lange theory. And the James-Lange theory tells us that the awareness of the physical or physiological response is what creates the emotion that we feel. So, for example, if you're going for a drive and you see a car coming directly towards you, James-Lange tells us the first thing that happens is the physical. Our heart starts pounding, and that leads us to the emotion of fear. So the physical precedes the emotional. I like to think of it as J comes before L in the alphabet for James-Lange, so the physical response comes before the emotion. Now, other psychologists believe that it is not a step-by-step process. The Cannon-Bard theory, for example, says that it is simultaneous, that car coming towards you is going to simultaneously trigger both the physical response and the emotion of fear at the same time. There is no delay taking place there. And then the Schacter Two-Factor theory of emotion says that we not only need that physical arousal, but we need to label it. Because heart pounding could be associated with a variety of emotions. Is our heart pounding because we're terrified? Is our heart pounding because we're excited? So if we see a car coming towards us and our heart starts pounding, we have to first label that physiological response of my heart is pounding with I'm afraid in order for us to actually feel that emotion. And the final theory is Richard Lazarus' cognitive appraisal theory of emotion. Very similar to the Schacter Two-Factor and the Cannon-Bard, but in this instance, we have to first appraise the situation, not the physiological response, the way that Schacter Two-Factor does. Basically, we have to decide what the importance is of the event that's occurring, and that is going to cause us to feel whatever emotion it is. So a car coming towards us is very important. It's going to trigger a very strong emotional reaction. If it's not important to us, this might help explain why two people might react very differently to the stress of a test, for example. If for one person it's very important to them, the emotion that they feel might be higher stress than someone who doesn't feel it is as important. That cognitive appraisal is going to affect the degree to which they experience the emotions associated with it. And then, of course, there is the biological response of fear and how it takes place in our brain. And this is known as the sightless fear response. If you've ever seen something out of the corner of your eye that causes you to startle before you're even consciously aware of it, tells us that sometimes we don't even have to be consciously aware to feel these emotions in our body. Research has actually been done on rats where they damage the auditory cortex and make a loud sound. The rats will still have a fear response even though their brain cannot process the sound that they heard. What we have found through this is that when information enters into your brain, it goes to our thalamus, as we know, but then it goes through a dual route process. Some of that information is sent to, if it's something we see, our visual cortex, but it's also sent directly to our limbic system, to our amygdala. So even before our brain has consciously processed what we saw or what we heard, our brain is already responding to that stimuli and can cause us to feel something like fear. So there are a lot of different processes involved in the emotions that we feel. They also show up, of course, on our face. And this is referred to as nonverbal communication and emotion. And this is something that is universally understood. All cultures around the world, all societies, use the same facial expressions to indicate different emotions. However, some cultures might express some emotions more than others. But when looking at individuals' faces, regardless of where a person comes from, we can typically identify the emotions that are being displayed because the way that emotions look on our facial expressions are approximately the same. And so we refer to this as universal facial expressions. And these facial expressions also play a role in how we feel. And we call this the facial feedback effect and the behavior feedback phenomenon, that essentially says that the motion can awaken the emotion. That by smiling more, we can actually feel happier. That by making ourselves look confident, we can actually feel confident. The facial feedback effect and behavior feedback phenomenon are essentially talking about the same thing. One is just focusing. And so let's go ahead and end today with 3 specific emotions: fear, anger, and happiness. The first one, fear. Researchers want to know what causes fear. And it seems to be that learning and experience, genes, and evolution all play a role in experiencing the emotion of fear. It makes sense the things that we fear are typically things that could be harmful to us. Things like spiders or snakes, sharks, open water, heights. Things that could be potentially harmful to us are the things that most people typically have a fear of. They're evolutionarily understandable why we have those fears. And we also, of course, have that amygdala that allows us to feel fear. People who lose the use of their amygdala are more trusting of what we would consider to be scary looking people than those with functional amygdalas. Anger is another emotion that many people experience. As we learned in social psychology, frustration-aggression principle tells us that aversive events can lead to aggressive behavior. Anger is a very interesting emotion. There are links to heart disease with a lot of anger, and so there are some negative health effects of feeling anger for an extended period of time. So if you have a lot of things that make you angry, the question is, what should you do with it? One possible outlet is what is known as catharsis, the emotional release through aggressive action or fantasy. Punching a pillow or a punching bag, writing a story about the person that you're angry with, something that's not actually going to cause them harm, but allows you to get the emotion out. Does it work? Research says that it can be temporarily calming as long as you don't feel guilty about it afterwards. But sometimes expressing more anger can actually lead to more anger developing. It sort of builds upon itself and can actually lead to more hostility. So the best option, and of course sometimes the hardest option, is to find ways to just let it go and forgive for your own sake and your own health. And our last emotion we'll look at today is happiness. And happiness is closely tied to well-being. People who are happy perceive the world as safer, make decisions easily, and live healthier, more energized lives. So what affects our happiness? Well, there is our subjective well-being or our self-perceived happiness, where we evaluate our own life and decide on how happy we are. Research shows that we all experience a variety of ups and downs in our lives, but we actually adapt to those ups and downs relatively well. It's known as our happiness set point, that when good things happen to us, we get used to them. Same thing with bad things. And so our happiness level is actually relatively stable. Does wealth help increase happiness? Research says no. We do need enough money to have our basic needs met, and therein lies the correlation between wealth and happiness. But once we reach that threshold where our basic needs are taken care of, increased wealth has no correlation with increased happiness. And as we said before, there is an adaptation level with happiness. We might think that specific things will make us happy: money, a job, a new car, getting into the school that we want. They might bring us temporary happiness, but eventually our happiness goes back down to normal. And so the question is, what is actually going to make us happy? And there's relative deprivation, where when we compare ourselves to others, we always feel that we are worse off compared to the people we compare ourselves to, because we have a tendency of upwards comparison. We don't compare ourselves to people who have it worse off. We are often looking at those that have more than us as our measure for happiness. So what actually makes us happy? There are a variety of things that we can do to help increase our happiness level. One of the best things we can do is express gratitude. Making a daily gratitude list has scientifically shown to improve our happiness levels. Engaging in those flow activities on a regular basis are going to increase our happiness and well-being. Connecting with others, social connection, is also vital to happiness. Creating goals and working towards them, movement and exercise, and being in nature. When we engage in these different tasks deliberately and practice them over time, they all have an impact on increasing our happiness. So pick one or two of them and try them out and see how you feel after doing them for 2 to 3 weeks. And there's always the feel good, do good phenomenon, which says that people are more helpful when they're in a good mood, and the opposite works as well. Random acts of kindness. When you do good, you will also feel good. So there's really no downside to helping. So that is where we will stop looking at emotions. Our final topic is going to be stress and health, and what we can do to reduce our stress and improve our well-being. So thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember, be kind to your mind.